Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this episode we're going to go after the turbo pedestal O-rings. I noticed we were dripping some oil down the bell housing. Went and checked, followed it up. It's coming out of the hole in the top of the valley, and after we sat for a bit, let the engine cool off, I got looking around. Can't really see it, but back there it's coming out of I think the upper O-ring right under the turbo. So we're going to replace all four. Alright, first we got our negative battery terminals off. Don't want to hit anything on the back of the alternator while we're moving that CAC tube around. Trim covers off here on the top of the motor. First I'm going to go after the 8mm bolts on this portion of the air intake. We'll get the boots loose on the spider and we'll go from there. These are 11mm. Just going to loosen the one side. Pull that tube out with the boot on it. So we got the two up high. And you got one down here under your battery box on the driver's side. And there's one over here on the passenger side, right next to the radiator. So you may or may not have stuff zip tied to your CAC tube. I got a couple zip ties on there I got to trim off. If your truck's not held together with zip ties, doing something wrong, right? Okay, zip ties removed. Let's try it again. There we go. Just weren't loose enough. Okay. So just kind of snake it out. Be careful your brake line down there next to your power steering reservoir. Okay, before we pull this tube out, I'm going to unplug this sensor down on the red, and then you can squeeze it. So we're going to get that out of the way. have to undo these two. I think they're T20s. Don't drop the screws. Those back in there. And we'll set them up top. Okay. Now, should be able to get this side out with some luck. Once you get the bottom loose, you can kind of roll it out like this. There we go. Okay, we're going to unplug our sensor for our intake air temperature sensor. Let's get our bracket here for the two vacuum lines. Set that down there while we're at it. While we're at it, there's a line that goes into your intake plenum here. Usually that pulls out, but maybe we can leave it. We'll undo this off of the turbo wastegate actuator. Ooh, that's cracked. Wow. That could be why we got a little bucking going on. Look at that. Split on the side. We'll have to get that fixed. Okay, and then lastly, that's a 10 mil. That's the air heater. So on the outside we got a nut, and a wire terminal, and a spacer. Just make sure we don't drop any of that. The nut's part of the wire, so that won't fall off, but let's take our spacer off, set that up here, pull this guy down. Okay. Got this loose, but not totally. And we got our two boots underneath. We're gonna have to loosen up. Here. That's 8. We'll loosen the top hose clamp on our boots underneath. One on each side. unplug that vacuum port in the bottom of the, what do we call it, spider. And then there's another sensor down here right next to it. Let's unplug that. And then lastly is, again, that little clamp on the bottom there. Right here. We can probably leave that on because it's just connected to this plug that we undid earlier. Okay, we should be able to get this out. Keyword should. Make sure that band loosens up. I'll pry on that a little bit. So the hose clamp, there we go. The outside clamp is loose, but the band underneath was stuck. There we go. Go a little more on that. It's like a 4-piece device. So we gotta break them all loose. Now we should be able to get something. Okay, so that comes off the turbo. And then we should be able to pull this straight up out of those two boots. One more thing hanging up here. There's a little J-hook to hold that wire loom up. So make sure you don't go crazy before you get that all out. Okay. Set that up there. Let's get the rest of the intake off, just so it's out of the way. We got one more right on the side here. There's two 8mm bolts holding this part of the plenum on. So underneath, there's a breather line. Let's see if we can get there. Coming in it's got one of those cinch clamps. We're gonna have to break that loose. We'll just replace it with a regular hose clamp. Okay. I'm going to get some towels, stuff them in those two orange boots, and then we'll work on getting the turbo out of there. Alright, so I got my towels in there. Just a quick observation while I was putting those in. This O-ring for the turbo doesn't look like it's in the best shape. Get something to pick that out of there with. I do have another one to replace this with, but the bottom looks... Oh, maybe it was just the way the oil was sitting on there. Yeah, it's not too bad. It looked worse the way the light was hitting it. Alright, so the two bolts on the turbo are 13s. Let's see if we can break these loose. Yeah. All right. Now the fun one in the back. Wow. Oh, we got her. Turbo bolts are out. Downpipe clamp we gotta loosen still. loosen. There's another one behind the turbo. Need an extension for this one. Okay, I got about an 8-inch extension on here so I can get some leverage. Let's see if we can get that one loose. Keep going. Okay, after fighting with the turbo for an hour, finally got it out. These back two exhaust clamps were a bear to get apart. So, and then when you do take the turbo out, you gotta slide this clip back and that pin will pull right out of there. I'm thinking this might need a rebuild too. Let's get this out of here. Here's one of the O-rings, super crusty, probably original. Yeah, you can see the oil was probably just running down the side there. It's all over the place. So, and I broke my tripod while I was wrestling with this. So there's 4 bolts on the pedestal, there's one back here, and then there's one in the front here in the corner. So let me get this out and then make sure you unplug this as well. That's got a metal locking clasp. Make sure you lift that up. Okay, looks like there's a small mouse's nest here too. We'll clean that out. All right, update. After wrestling with that, those 2 clamps on the back, the exhaust side, and that back bolt on the pedestal, finally got that out. Got it cleaned up here, ready to go back to reinstallation. So I saw a trick from, I think it was Clint Allen that does a lot of these 7.3 repairs. He said to take some of the ultra gray and you kind of make a little gasket nest for your O-rings in here, just enough to take up a little bit of the slop maybe that would be in there over time. Your O-ring's going to get hard and it's going to settle down a little bit. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to fill this void and around the perimeter of this hole with some of this gray gasket maker. Let it set up a bit and then we'll put the gaskets in. Okay, so here's what I ended up with. The gasket material is below the surface. I kind of ran a little flat blade around there to clean off the excess. And then on this hole, because the O-ring sits on the outside of the hole, the outer perimeter, I kind of have a wedge starting from the center, and then I tapered it up to this upper surface. So once this sets up a little bit, we'll drop the O-rings in there. Okay, our gasket maker's set up. Let's drop this on top. And you want to just push it about a third into the material. Same with this side. Just so it starts pushing out the edge. All right, I'm gonna get the same thing going on the back where the turbo pedestal bolts on, and we'll check back in with you then. Got the turbo pedestal back on, the gasket material under the O-rings underneath where it connects to the motor. We're gonna run the 4 bolts down with the 10mm, and we'll torque it down to 18 foot-pounds. All right, turbo pedestal back in, 4 bolts torqued to 18 foot-pounds. We're gonna start lining up the turbo. I'm gonna probably loosely start the 2 bolts on top and then try to get my down pipe hooked up before I drive it home. It's gonna be a work in progress here. Okay, the worst seems to be over. Got the turbo back in, all the clamps on, torque down to 35 foot-pounds on the 2 on the top, 18 foot-pounds on the 4 bolts on the bottom. So we're just gonna do reverse order. Let me put this all back together and we'll start it up, see how she runs.